Welcome. Thank you for joining our session. Our topic today is 5 tips to a superior AI-powered candidate and employee experience. My name is Steve Feyer, and I'm Director of Product Marketing at Eightfold AI. And I'm thrilled to be joined here by 2 terrific experts in candidate and employee experience. Matt Hill, who's Director of Talent Acquisition and People Analytics for Dexcom. Hello, Matt.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be at my first Eightfold Cultivate event. I lead the talent acquisition and people analytics team at Dexcom. We're a leading medical device company in the healthcare sensing market, focused on continuous glucose monitoring for people living with diabetes. We've been growing by about 40% a year since I arrived 5 years ago, going from hundreds of hires a year in the US to thousands of hires a year globally. I've been dabbling with machine learning and AI tools for a long time, but I've been pandemic partnering with Eightfold since early 2020.
Well, welcome, Matt. Thank you. I also want to welcome our other panelists today, Pete Lawson, who's Vice President of Growth and Client Services at Proactive Talent. Hi, Pete. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm Pete Lawson, as Steve said. I'm the VP of Growth and Client Services at Proactive Talent. Proactive Talent is an end-to-end consulting firm on all things talent acquisition. Before this, I was a VP of talent acquisition over at Postmates, where we were acquired by Uber. That's where the dream of Eightfold came real for me on all things AI powered and talent intelligence. But really, my experience is in hyper growth organizations that are scaling rapidly. So excited to be on the panel here and talk more about what's really important to me, which is the experience of candidates as they navigate through the process.
Well, let's dive right in and light this candle, because I know you each have terrific advice for a great candidate and employee experience. And I want to go through the recommendations that you have today in the order of events that the candidate and then the employee would experience. And that begins with the candidate's job discovery experience. So, Matt, I know you had some advice about candidate job discovery.
Absolutely. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. And what always comes to mind from the candidate's perspective is information asymmetry, right? And what does that mean for those who haven't come across that concept? It's basically an economics concept where one party in a transaction has more or better information than the other, which basically causes transactions to be inefficient. Of course, that happens all the time. But for us today, it's about candidates that just don't have enough information or context to find the right job inside of our companies. And it's the same issue for all companies, right? Candidates don't understand your structure, your terminology. They're trying to search for the right jobs, and it's frustrating. And so this discovery phase is critical. It's when you can win or lose the battle for talent, and you really need to sweat the details. When you can truly break down jobs, resumes, career trajectory data, and explain to candidates how and why they might be a strong match with certain jobs, it eliminates that information asymmetry. Candidates don't need to understand your entire career framework in order to find the right position for them, and they feel more confident about applying to the job or jobs based on their skills and not based on arcane titles and department names. And you know what? Candidates love it, and they think it's cool too. Thanks to this, we've had a consistently high visit to apply ratio since implementing our personalized career site. But even better, our hires over the last year are consistently rated in the highest matching tier compared to those who were not hired. To close on this topic, even internal candidates who know the lingo and the broader organization can have trouble navigating your career site. But I'll talk more about that aspect of the employee experience in a little bit.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. Pete, did you want to add any additional comments about job discovery?
I think the only other thing is just, which Matt already hit on, is just the really just thinking of the psychologically of like the experience candidates are having, through the life cycle. So as Matt touched on, I think a lot of times it's kind of an afterthought of people not really understanding. You kind of getting caught within that silo within your organization of knowing certain terminology and just kind of really assuming that your general audience understands everything along with it, as far as whether it's acronyms and just kind of oversight on that. But I think when I think of this, when I'm designing a process, it's really thinking in the shoes and the lens of a candidate that might know nothing about your brand and who you are as an organization, but maybe knows the consumer side. And so just kind of flipping that a bit and really looking through that lens.
Well, it's a great tip and really important. And I think in terms of the second tip, I want to turn it over to you, Pete, to talk about a topic I know is dear to you, which is assessments, and how assessments could be an important part of the candidate experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, especially as you're thinking of technical talent, assessments are huge. You need to understand the technical aptitude of a candidate. And a lot of times that is done. To me, there's a couple things I want to touch on here. One is just when you do that, and then the other thing is, and how you calibrate that, and the other thing is how you communicate that to a candidate. Because I think a lot of times, again, to my point of like looking through the lens of the candidate and what their experience is through your process. I've worked with a lot of organizations and hiring leaders that, they kind of get caught within their bubble a bit and say, we're going to build this test so hard, hardly anyone's going to get through. And you have to be like the top of your game in order to be able to talk to me. Well, maybe that can work if you're a Google or a Facebook or, one of the FANGs. But if you're a brand that is really having trouble acquiring, especially technical talent, you've really got to think of it as an opportunity, like one of the first touch points to really sell the candidate on why you're an interesting and compelling place to even work for, and why, what their career trajectory is going to look like, and all of that. So I think from a timing perspective, as you think of assessments and building those in, yes, definitely build it into the beginning of the process. But there's a couple different lanes that I would go to when thinking of like how you navigate a person through the process. The one lane of, you're going out there and tapping the shoulder of a passive candidate that is maybe not looking, or doing a great job with their head down at another company and doing meaningful work. And as a recruiter, you're touching them twice, three times to try to get them even interested in talking to you. So I think throwing a 3-hour assessment at them immediately after you're like, we got them, they're talking to us, it's bad taste. So I try to build a pathway for that type of candidate to be able to have one or maybe even two more touch points with a hiring leader to kind of really sell and explain why we're a compelling organization to come through before they're spending 2 or 3 hours on an assessment test. And then there's the applicants. So we built, when I was at Postmates, one of the first things that we did was just redid our entire assessment tool. But for anyone that was applying to us that was already interested in our brand and working with us, one of the first touch points we did was obviously have a conversation as a recruiter screen and whatnot, but we really built up that assessment as like, this is really your first on-site. So yeah, you're going to go and take this 2-hour test. But it's really our first step in getting to know you and to understand your technical aptitude. And I think like how you communicate that to a candidate is really key for them to also analyze whether or not they want to even take the test and they want to continue in that process. So that's one piece of it. And I think, if you're doing the math on thinking how much a lot of the candidates we're talking to in the technical space, they're talking to 4, 5, 6 other companies. It's a very competitive market. Do the math on how much time they're taking assessments, and they're going to be very picky on who they're spending their time with. So how you sell that messaging and how you really explain your organization for them to feel like they're going to dedicate that 2 hours on their weekend to it is key. And then the other piece I want to touch on is just I think a lot of times when I'm working with organizations on a consulting basis, I find that they have an assessment, but they're like, yeah, it's old. We'll get to it. We're gonna redo that later, but it's not that great. But it's also like one of the first, it's like a first date for an engineer. So like it's one of the first times that an engineer gets to really understand, how that hiring leader or how that team is thinking about their bar of talent and how their technical aptitude, bar essentially, and how the coding language works. And I think there's a lot that can be seen through that lens from a candidate standpoint of just, I've had candidates take tests and they're like, that was really easy. I don't know if that's hard for you guys. I'm not sure this is the place for me. Or that was so hard, it feels like this is a trick. And so there's so much that can be like really taken from how you build your assessment test. And I think it's a lot of times an afterthought for organizations to refresh that test on an ongoing basis. I think it should be an iteration and a quarterly review of like how you're, recalibrating that test on an ongoing basis, because it has such an impact on how many people take the test and how they see your organization, but also just like what's more to come if they're working within that engineering, especially within the engineering organization.
Well, I think that's so smart to think about the assessment, not just from what it does for the employer, but from the point of view of the candidate as well. And that's going to be so important. Matt, did you want to add anything on this topic of assessments?
Yeah, I think it is from an experience perspective. How does it feel? What additional value are they getting out of it? For example, will they get some sort of watered down copy of their general assessment back? That's one way that you can encourage the experience to be a more positive one.
Let's keep going with tip number 3, and I want to stay with you, Pete, for this one to talk about scheduling and how scheduling can have a really important impact on the experience as well. Why is that? Why is scheduling so important?
I've always thought it was important, but and whenever I hire a recruiting coordinator, I like bow down to them because it's a skill set that I lack as far as the organization and the Tetris of calendaring and all of that. So I it's not a job that should be taken for granted at all. It's challenging, but I think more especially in the age of COVID, and I think everybody a year and a half ago got into their caves, right, and didn't have in-office experiences, and so again, just thinking through that lens of the candidate experience, a misstep with scheduling, if you're just thinking from a logistics standpoint, employer brand standpoint, a misstep with scheduling is one of the very few touch points you get with a candidate to show like, well, if you have your stuff together or not, and inconsistencies with that, whether it's like, no shows on the hiring manager or panel side, they show up for an interview and no one's there, or if it's constant rescheduling and whatnot. Those are the little touch points that a candidate can see that are like, I don't know if I want to sign up for this. I don't know if I want to continue. I know I've had experience like that where I've chased a future employer that I wanted to work for, to try to get in front of the next step, which someone already told me was going to happen. And so like, I already have a yellow flag at that point. So I think just from an experience standpoint, it's really important because if you think of the onsite, maybe you have your first onsite that goes really well. You're sitting in the lobby, you get to absorb the environment, the culture. You start thinking like, oh, that I could see myself working here. You see these little anecdotal things that start to add a storyline for yourself to understand if you can picture yourself working there. You don't get that in working in your garage, right? So like you don't have those opportunities. So if there's a misstep from a scheduling standpoint, it's a much bigger impact, I think, today than it was, 2 years ago. So there's just that piece of the candidate experience. And then as I think of just, removing unconscious bias and really building intelligent interview panels and having analytics behind like understanding the interview behaviors, that's where I've really, really valued, layering on AI within the schedule piece. So automating a lot of the scheduling, both to just build, again, on the unconscious bias side, you can build panels and kind of have a predetermined route for that candidate to go through and navigate through because you've decided, all right, these are the 5 types of people that want to assess this candidate. These are the skill sets that these 5-6 people should have. And when you build the AI on the back end to automate for that, when there's a quick scheduling snafu or the candidate needs to reschedule, that process is just so much quicker. I saved like 2 weeks total from end to end when I ran this at Postmates on just scheduling one candidate. It was a 2 week per candidate kind of average of time we made up of just scheduling. And then if you think about all that time that you're given back, for me, we deployed a lot of the coordination piece. They had so much more time back in their day from a scheduling standpoint because the AI was doing it all. It created a better experience for the candidate. But then also those recruiting coordinators could spend a lot more time doing more meaningful work, not do the Tetris calendaring and all of that, and build content for social and do some of the really great project work around candidate experience. And then recruiter has a lot more time to spend with that candidate to sell the opportunity, to help them kind of shepherd them in the process, to explain what the hiring leaders, and the panel is going to look like and what the hiring leader wants to know about them and et cetera. So I think, I think when AI was first coming out around this, everybody was like, oh, that's scary because it's like not as much human interaction, but it's actually even more because, you're taking some of the monotony out of the process and the more of the human connection opportunity.
I really appreciate something you said in there, Pete, that's really insightful, I think. That having AI help you create this seamless and accelerated scheduling experience is especially important if you aren't going to be in person. Because without even intending to, perhaps in the past you've depended on having a beautiful atrium that will distract your candidate whose interviewer is late, or a nice cup of Starbucks coffee. But you can't offer that now when everyone's at home. So that's really, really something. Matt, is there anything that you wanted to add on this idea of scheduling?
We're still on our scheduling automation journey, so I'm sitting with the audience and learning on this one. We really believe in the technology, and scheduling is so core to all those hiring outcomes. We're walking a bit more slowly, but we're excited to see where we end up.
All right. Well, we're on to the next tip, number 4 here. I'm going to bring this one back to Pete again to talk to us about the offer experience. And you were really passionate about this when we last spoke. So why does the offer matter for the candidate experience?
Yeah, I'm super passionate because it's the end of the candidate experience journey, and hopefully the beginning of the journey for them as an employee of the organization. So like this is the whole reason all the work that's done leading up to this point is to get here, right? And so I think a lot of times organizations fumble here, and I think it's super important on really the offer negotiation. To me, starts on the very first call you have with the candidate. I mean, that's really where that trust is built, and where you have a strong understanding of where that if you're building a really good process for how you're scoping the role, what the expectations are from a comp standpoint. There are some roles we've all worked on that are like, I think I need a manager, but I take a director. And so that gives you a much broader, comp bands to work with. But at least if you have, your swim lane and really understand, all right, here's the guardrails for this role from a comp standpoint, from a scope standpoint, and you're doing a great job on the front end of aligning. To me, once you get to that final offer, and if you're doing a great job throughout the relationship, that should be the easiest part, really. And I don't take it for granted, but I really, as a recruiter, I build relationships. I like to build the relationship with the candidate coming in. I got into this business because it's like one of the biggest decisions that you make in your life is like where you're going to spend a majority of your time, even more than you spend with your family, in the organization you're working for, and how that can impact your career and everything. And so I take personally, and how I build teams is take that really seriously on how we shepherd that candidate through the process. And there are opportunities where we've had really great talent that are in the middle stage of the process, and they're looking at 3 other companies that are kind of apples and oranges for what we're doing, and we're just like hoping and praying that they just stick with us, where we have the conversation of like, I'm not sure this is for you, because I think we're going to get to that offer stage, and we're going to be 100K under compared to some of the companies you're talking to. So I think once you get to that very last stage, the offer stage, all of those ducks should be in a row. And I see this kind of as a relationship dance where it's like, it's like you wouldn't go propose to someone without maybe having some of that conversation or having an inkling that they're going to say yes. Like no one wants to, puke on their shoes in the proposal stage, right? So like you're going to have those other touch points in between to really have a strong barometer of like where this person sits mentally on where that offer is going to be. When it comes to like the logistics of who gives it, I am a strong believer that that happens in recruiting, to the point of like, if you're building that relationship with that candidate in a meaningful way as a recruiter and shepherding them through and really being their career, how I've run teams in the past is like, you're their career advisor. You're working for that candidate. Yeah, you're representing the organization, but you really should be looking out for them, because then they become an employee, and now you're their peer and you're an ambassador of like their success as well. So if you're really working with them in that line, the offer process at the very end and that negotiation should be much easier. I do think like a hiring leader should come in after that verbal's been given, to kind of with that extra hug really, and comfort of like, we're really excited to have you. This is all the reasons why we chose you. I really hope you join. But when it comes to like compensation and negotiating that, I think it's a miss when companies try to put that with the leader. I think that's where it should sit with recruiting, personally, where I've seen the most success.
Well, that's so important to have that offer work, and maybe some AI helps you get that offer to the candidate first, because you've been more efficient through the whole process. I want to take us to our last tip, because that offer turns the candidate into an employee if they accept. So Matt, I know at the last tip you wanted to talk about the employee experience and how you can make the employee experience really engaging and impactful. What advice would you offer to our audience here?
Employee experience is something that we at Dexcom have been doing a ton about over the last 18 months to really focus on and measure. and really look at those moments that matter through the overall life cycle. As we just talked about, that offer experience really is your first moment as an employee. If you think about it, the moment that you decide to accept is the moment you really become an employee. And so, that transition is important. And one of the top things that we heard when we were doing this research was that employees want more tools to manage their career. They don't just want a place to apply to jobs and hope for the best, as if they were an external candidate. Once we implemented AI matching technology on our front-end external career site and for our recruiting team on the back-end tools, we shifted our focus to leveraging this same great experience for our internal talent networks. It may have been a bit backward, but we learned a lot of great lessons along the way. And so now our employees can log into a career hub, they can upload their resume, they can manage their skills profile, they can see all the current matching jobs, internal jobs, every time they visit that site. And when they're there, they can also upload their referrals resume to get a list of the best matches to which they can be directly referred. So now, with tools that easily match our own internal employee network against all of our positions, we're starting to talk more about whether we should shift our philosophy to more proactively recruiting candidates internally. So we're going to go more aggressively, get these tools out in front of employees. We want them to always know what's out there, what's that potential next step for them. And I'd be happy to talk about how this plays out at future events. But now we're looking at career pathing, mentoring, internal project matching, and other ways to use AI skills matching to reduce that whole information asymmetry problem for our own employees. And so really we want to look at these as alternatives to the status quo tools, ones that are less process heavy, more biased towards action and outcomes, because after all, that's the experience that our employees want.
There you have it. 5 great ways that you can use AI and really thoughtful experience development, candidate job discovery, assessments, scheduling, the offer experience, and the employee experience to create a really positive impact in your organization. And I know Matt and Pete, you have both been instrumental in growing great organizations. I'm sure our audience has some questions for you, and we are here in the chat to answer questions right now. On behalf of everyone, and especially Pete and Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at the rest of Cultivate.